I never thought my quiet life in the countryside would turn into a war zone, but I guess trouble has a way of finding you when you least expect it. My name is Jonathan Rains, and for most of my life, I have been a man who believed in law, order, and the Constitution of the United States. As a federal judge, I have presided over some of the most dangerous cases in the country: drug cartels, organized crime, corrupt corporations, and even domestic terror cells. My name has been in the news more times than I can count. Sometimes celebrated, sometimes vilified, but always respected in the halls of justice. When my wife, Hannah, and I bought our ranch just outside of Ashwood, we thought we were finally leaving all of that behind. The ranch was supposed to be our sanctuary, a place to raise our kids in peace, away from the chaos of city life, away from the constant media attention, away from the threats that sometimes followed me after a high-profile verdict. I never imagined that the people I'd end up clashing with would be my neighbors. Well, not exactly neighbors, but the people running the so-called Homeowners Association of the newly developed subdivision that bordered my land. It started small, as these things usually do. About a year after we moved into the ranch, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, just a clean envelope with my name typed neatly on the front. Inside was a welcome notice from the Ashwood Creek HOA, claiming that, as a resident of the area, I was now part of the community and expected to pay monthly dues. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with Hannah, holding that letter in one hand and my coffee mug in the other, staring at it like it was a joke. My land was purchase free and clear. I wasn't part of any planned development. I didn't share roads, water systems, or amenities with their subdivision, and no one had the legal authority to force me into any association. I put the letter down and laughed. "Looks like someone's trying to shake us down," I said. Hannah frowned, sensing that this was more than just a harmless misunderstanding. I shrugged it off at first and tossed the letter in the trash. A week later, I got another one. This one wasn't as friendly. It listed my outstanding balance for HOA dues, late fees, and an administrative penalty for ignoring their previous notice. It was accompanied by a photocopy of what they claimed was their covenants, conditions, and restrictions agreement with my name typed onto it, as though I had signed something I'd never seen in my life. Now I was annoyed. I drafted a short, formal letter in response, stating that I was not, nor had I ever been, a member of their HOA, and that any further attempt to collect money from me would be considered harassment and refer to legal authorities. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The harassment escalated quickly. First, it was random visits from HOA board members, showing up at the gate of my ranch demanding to inspect my property for violations. I told them politely but firmly that they had no right to step foot on my land, and that if they trespass again, I'd call the sheriff. Then came the fines. Letters showed up almost weekly, each one more outrageous than the last. Violation for improper fencing. Violation for unauthorized livestock. Violation for unapproved structures. My so-called fines were now in the thousands of dollars, which I of course refused to pay. That's when the threats began. They sent me notices claiming they had the right to place a lien on my property, to seize it if necessary. I knew enough about property law to know this was complete nonsense. They had no jurisdiction over me, no legal claim, and no authority. But what disturbed me most wasn't the legal harassment. It was the way some of the HOA members began behaving. Trucks started driving slowly past my property at night. My mailbox was smashed. Twice. One morning, I found a dead coyote dump at the end of my driveway, its throat slit. Hannah was terrified, and I can't blame her. I started carrying my sidearm more often, even around the house, just in case. I installed cameras, reinforced the locks, and taught my kids what to do if anyone tried to come onto property without permission. Still, I hoped, naively, that things would calm down. Then came the night that changed everything. It was just after midnight when I woke to the smell of smoke. At first, I thought it was a dream. Then I heard the crackling sound and saw the orange glow through the bedroom window. "Hannah, get the kids!" I shouted. Leaping out of bed and grabbing the fire extinguisher I kept by the door, I ran down the hallway, choking on the thick smoke as I tried to see where the fire was coming from. It was in the living room. No. The kitchen. No. Everywhere. Someone had poured accelerant along the porch and lit it. Our house was going up in flames. By the time we got outside, the whole front of the ranch house was an inferno. I could see tire tracks in the dirt leading back toward the subdivision road. Fresh ones. Someone had done this on purpose, and I had a sickening feeling I knew exactly who. I rushed Hannah and the kids toward the truck and got them to safety. We barely had time to grab a few bags before the roof collapsed. I stood there helpless, watching everything we owned burn to the ground. My fists clenched so hard they ached. My wife was crying. My kids were screaming. And deep down beneath the heartbreak, a dark, cold fury began to build inside me. The fire department showed up 20 minutes later. Too late to save anything. The fire chief told me there was evidence of arson, but he stopped short of saying who might have done it. I knew, though, the threats, the harassment, the drive-bys, this was the HOA's way of teaching me a lesson. They thought they could scare me into submission, make me pay, make me bend the knee like every other homeowner they bullied. But they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. I wasn't just some rancher. I wasn't just a husband and father. I was Judge Jonathan Rains, the man who had sent cartel bosses to prison for life, who had dismantled entire criminal syndicates with a single ruling, who had faced death threats before and never backed down. And now I was coming for them. The morning after the fire, I stood on what used to be my porch, staring at the smoking ruin that was once my home. The air still smelled like gasoline. Ash fell around me like snow, coated my boots, my clothes, my hands. Hannah had taken the kids to her sister's house in town, where they'd be safe for the time being. I stayed behind because I couldn't leave. This wasn't over. It wasn't even close. My home had been destroyed, but the part of me that made me who I am, the part that had spent a lifetime fighting criminals, liars, and cowards, was burning hotter than the fire that had taken everything from me. The county sheriff came by just after sunrise. He was a good man, Sheriff Duncan, the kind of no-nonsense lawman you want on your side when things go bad. He looked at the wreckage and swore under his breath. "John," he said quietly, "this was no accident. I've got my fire investigator saying there were multiple points of ignition. Somebody wanted this house gone." I nodded, jaw tight. I already know who did it. Duncan glanced at me. "The HOA? Who else? They've been threatening me for months. They've vandalized my property, they've trespassed, they've sent fake fines and legal threats. This is the next step in their escalation." He took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "John, you know I'll do everything I can, but I've only got so much authority. If you're right, this is arson, criminal trespass, maybe even attempted murder if you're inside at the time. But these people are clever. They're going to have alibis. They'll say it wasn't them. We'll need hard evidence." "I'll get you evidence," I said coldly. After Duncan left, I got to work. I may have been a judge, but I was no stranger to investigation. Over the years, I had worked with some of the best federal agents, prosecutors, and marshals in the country. I had their numbers on my phone. I made a few calls, short and precise. By the afternoon, I had an ATF investigator and a federal arson specialist on site. They collected samples from the burn patterns, took photographs, and promised me a full report. While they worked, I reviewed my security camera footage. Most of the cameras had melted in the fire, but the one facing the driveway had survived. What I saw made my blood run cold and then boil with rage. At 11:43 p.m., a dark pickup truck with its headlights off had pulled up near my gate. 3 figures got out. 2 carried gas cans. The third had what looked like a road flare. They moved quickly, pouring accelerant along the porch and the front wall. At 11:49 p.m., they lit the flare and tossed it. The screen went white from the flash, then black as the flames consumed the camera. I zoomed in on the truck. The plate was visible, though partially obscured by mud. Still, I knew how to get it enhanced. I sent the footage to a contact in the U.S. Marshal Service, someone who owed me a favor. Within an hour, I had a name, Marcus Kane. Marcus Kane was the president of the Ashwood Creek HOA. My hands were shaking when I got the confirmation. I wasn't afraid. No. Fear had burned away with the house. What I felt was something sharper, colder, a clarity. These people thought they were above the law, but they had just handed me everything I needed to destroy them. I didn't go to Kane's house right away, though I wanted to. Instead, I started building my case. I gathered every letter, every notice, every piece of evidence the HOA had ever sent me. I photographed the tire tracks leading from my driveway back toward the subdivision. I made copies of security footage, sent them to multiple cloud backups, and kept one on an encrypted drive. That night, I went into town and met with Hannah and the kids. My wife's eyes were red from crying, but when she saw me, she stood tall. "Did you find out who did it?" she asked. "Yes," I said. And now, I told her, we go on the offensive. The next day, I drove to the federal courthouse in the city and filed a civil suit against the Ashwood Creek HOA and its board members personally, Kane included, for harassment, attempted extortion, property damage, and now arson. I also filed an emergency motion requesting protective orders for me and my family. When the clerk saw my name on the filing, she raised an eyebrow. It's not every day a sitting federal judge walks in to file suit. By the end of the week, federal agents had interviewed Kane and 2 other HOA board members. They denied everything, of course. Kane even had the gall to send me a smug letter claiming I was defaming the reputation of the HOA and threatening to countersue me. That was the final straw. I paid Kane a personal visit. It was a Saturday afternoon when I drove up to his McMansion, parked right in front, and knocked on the door. When he opened it, the color drained from his face. He hadn't expected me to confront him directly. "Kane," I said evenly, "I know it was you. I have your truck on camera. I have federal investigators who can testify about the accelerant they found on my property. You tried to kill my family. You burned my house to the ground. And now I'm going to make sure you spend the rest of your life wishing you had never heard my name." He tried to bluster, to tell me I was trespassing, that he'd call the cops. I just smiled. "Do it," I said. "Call them. I'd love to explain to them why I'm here. Maybe I'll even show them the footage right now." For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You're damn right it's not," I said, stepping closer so he could see I meant every word. "But here's the thing, Kane. Unlike you, I play by the law. I don't need to burn your house down to ruin you. I have the courts, I have the law, and I have a reputation for being relentless. You picked the wrong man to mess with." When I left, I saw his hands shaking as he closed the door. But I knew this wasn't going to end with lawsuits and polite threats. People like Kane don't back down until they're forced to. I needed to hit harder. I needed to make an example out of the entire HOA so that no one else would ever try something like this again. And I had just a plan to do it. The following week, I went back to my office at the courthouse, not as Judge Raines, but as a man with a mission. I recused myself from my docket for the next month, citing personal matters, and put my clerks in charge of coordinating with visiting judges to cover my cases. I wasn't going to let the Ashwood Creek HOA think I was distracted or vulnerable. If they wanted a war, I would give them one. And I wouldn't just fight back. I would bury them under the full weight of the law. The first thing I did was leverage the one tool no HOA president ever expects a victim to have: federal subpoena power. Through my lawsuit, I was able to request discovery of all HOA records, emails, and board meeting minutes for the past 2 years. Kane tried to stonewall, claiming the documents were privileged, but that only made me smile. I had dealt with mob lawyers who tried the same tricks. By the time I was done, a federal magistrate had signed an order compelling them to turn everything over. When the records arrived, I spent an entire weekend combing through them. What I found made my blood boil, and my lips curl into a grim smile at the same time. This HOA wasn't just harassing me. They were running a full-blown extortion racket. Their emails revealed schemes to target troublemaker homeowners, slapped them with bogus fines, and threatened foreclosure until they either paid up or moved away. They even had a compliance committee whose job was to drive by properties at night, looking for violations. And there, in black and white, was a smoking gun, an email from Kane to 2 board members, dated 2 days before my house burned down. "Time to turn up the heat on Raines." It read, "He thinks he's untouchable. We'll show him who runs this neighborhood. Let's make sure he gets the message loud and clear." They thought turn up the heat was just a figure of speech. I knew better. I forwarded the entire email chain to the ATF and the FBI. Within days, the HOA board members were under federal investigation for racketeering, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Agents began quietly interviewing other homeowners in the subdivision, and what they found only added fuel to the fire. Several residents admitted they had been coerced into paying thousands of dollars in special assessments that were never used for community improvements. Others described having their fences cut, their pets poisoned, their cars vandalized, all after they refused to pay HOA fines. The picture was becoming clear. Ashwood Creek wasn't a neighborhood. It was a fiefdom, and Kane was the petty tyrant who ruled it with fear. While the federal investigation gathered steam, I kept my own offensive going. I contacted local news outlets and gave them an exclusive statement, not as Judge Raines, but as a private citizen whose home had been burned to the ground by a corrupt HOA. I told them about the harassment, the fake fines, the late-night intimidation, and the arson. I didn't give them all the evidence yet. I wanted to keep some cards close to my chest, but I gave them enough to run the story. By the next morning, my face was on every local TV channel. Federal judge's home burned down amid HOA dispute blared across the screen. The public reaction was immediate and brutal. People flooded the HOA's social media pages with angry comments. Homeowners from other subdivisions began sharing their own horror stories about abusive HOAs. Suddenly, Kane and his board weren't just dealing with me. They were dealing with public outrage. Kane made the mistake of calling a press conference to set the record straight. He stood there in his polo shirt and khakis, talking about maintaining community standards and a misunderstanding with Mr. Raines. I saw the sweat on his forehead. Reporters grilled him about the fire, about the intimidation, about the lawsuit. He gave non-answers, and the more he dodged, the guiltier he looked. Behind the scenes, I was building my next move. I petitioned the court for a preliminary injunction to freeze the HOA's bank accounts pending the outcome of my lawsuit. Kane's lawyer fought it. But when I presented the email about turning up the heat, the judge granted the freeze on the spot. Suddenly, the HOA had no access to funds, no money for landscaping, no money for security patrols, no money for their lawyers. The board was in panic mode, and I wasn't done yet. One by one, I subpoenaed HOA board members for depositions. Sitting across from me in the conference room, under oath, they began to crack. One board member, Susan, the treasurer, broke down in tears halfway through her testimony. She admitted that Kane had personally ordered the harassment campaign against me, that he kept a secret slush fund from HOA dues, and that he bragged about teaching the judge a lesson after the fire. That was the moment the case turned from civil to criminal. The FBI raided Kane's house 2 days later. They found gasoline cans matching the residue of my ranch, as well as a burner phone with text messages coordinating the arson with 2 hired thugs. Kane was arrested on charges of arson, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The other 2 board members were picked up as co-conspirators. But even as Kane sat in jail awaiting trial, the HOA tried to keep operating, sending out letters to homeowners demanding dues. That's when I decided to finish what I started. I filed a motion to have the entire HOA placed under court-appointed receivership, effectively stripping the board of all power. The judge granted it, citing overwhelming evidence of corruption and criminal activity. Overnight, Ashwood Creek HOA ceased to exist as an independent entity. But I wasn't satisfied. Not yet. These people had terrorized their neighbors for years, and I wanted every single homeowner who had been victimized to see justice. I organized a town hall meeting, rented the community center, and invited every resident to come and tell their story. The place was packed. People lined up to the microphone to talk about the fines, the threats, the retaliation they'd endured. Some cried as they spoke. Others shouted in anger. By the end of the night, I had a list of over 40 residents who were willing to testify against the HOA in court. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It had become a crusade. And I wasn't stopping until every single person responsible for what happened to my family was held accountable. The day of Marcus Kane's arraignment felt like a strange homecoming. I wasn't sitting on the bench this time, presiding over the courtroom. I was sitting in the front row as a plaintiff, a victim, and a man ready to watch justice be served. Kane shuffled into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, shackles on his wrists and ankles. The sight of him like that should have satisfied me, but it didn't. It was too easy, too quick. I wanted him to feel the weight of everything he had done, to face the full power of the law, not to spend a few nights in jail before making bail. Kane's attorney argued for release pending trial, claiming he wasn't flight risk, but the prosecutor laid out the evidence. The burner phone, the gas cans, the surveillance footage, the threatening emails. The judge didn't hesitate. Bail denied. Kane's eyes locked on mine as the deputies led him away, and I saw pure hatred in them. It didn't scare me. It just told me that I was winning. But if I thought Kane's arrest would end the danger, I was wrong. 2 nights later, while I was staying at a rented cabin near town, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel outside. My hand went to the pistol on the nightstand as I crept to the window. A car sat idling in the darkness. Then, without warning, a shot rang out, shattering the front window. I hit the floor and returned fire, sending 2 rounds into the night. The car peeled out, tires screaming, and disappeared down the road. By the time Sheriff Duncan arrived, I'd already called in every federal contact I had. We found shell casings near the driveway, .45 caliber, professional-grade ammunition. This wasn't random vandalism. It was a message. Someone loyal to Kane was trying to scare me off before trial. Instead of backing down, I doubled my security. The U.S. Marshal Service put my family under protective detail. I started wearing a vest when I traveled, and I went right back to preparing my case. The trial began 3 months later, and it was one of the most intense proceedings I had ever witnessed, even from the gallery. The prosecution laid out the timeline of harassment, the financial records showing the HOA's extortion scheme, the burner phone messages that placed Kane at the scene the night of the fire. Susan, the former treasurer, took the stand and testified tearfully about how Kane had pressured her into keeping 2 sets of books, one official for homeowners, and one secret that contained the slush fund. She described late-night board meetings where Kane bragged about teaching residents respect by sabotaging their property. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the stand in my suit and tie, raised my right hand, and swore the oath. I looked the jury in the eyes and told them everything about the first letter, the fake fines, the intimidation, the fire, the night my children woke up screaming as their home burned around them. The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of my own voice. I wasn't just a federal judge that day. I was a husband, a father, and a man demanding justice. Kane's attorney tried to rattle me on cross-examination, suggesting I was using my position to settle a personal vendetta. I didn't take the bait. Calmly, methodically, I laid out the facts, letting the jury see that this wasn't vengeance. This was justice. After 3 weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. I sat in the courtroom with Hannah's hand in mine as the foreman stood and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts. Arson, conspiracy, attempted murder, racketeering. Kane's face went pale as the judge sentenced him to 40 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The other board members received lesser sentences, but they, too, were going away for a long time. The courtroom erupted in murmurs as the deputies led them out in chains. But I wasn't done. The civil case against the HOA was still pending, and with Kane convicted, it was practically a formality. The court awarded me full compensation for the value of my ranch house, punitive damages for emotional distress, and attorney's fees. But I didn't stop there. I pushed for restitution to every homeowner who had been victimized. The court-appointed receiver liquidated the HOA's assets, sold off the common property, and distributed the funds to the residents. For the first time in years, the people of Ashwood Creek were free. At the final hearing, I stood before the judge and addressed the courtroom. This case is more than just about one man's home, I said. It is about the abuse of power. It is about people who think that because they have a title, president, board member, compliance officer, they can terrorize their neighbors without consequence. That ends today. Let this case be a warning to every corrupt HOA board across the country. You are not above the law. The room erupted in applause. The media picked up the story nationwide. News anchors debated the case. Legal analysts praised the ruling, and homeowners across America began challenging their own HOAs. The Ashwood Creek case became a precedent cited in lawsuits from coast to coast. For the first time, HOA boards everywhere were put on notice that harassment and intimidation could lead to prison time. Even with the victory, life didn't go back to normal right away. The cabin felt cold and temporary, and the kids still jumped at loud noises. But slowly we began to heal. The insurance payout, combined with the damages from the lawsuit, allowed us to rebuild the ranch house. Bigger, stronger, fireproof with steel and concrete. This time, I installed a state-of-the-art security system, motion lights, and reinforced gates. When we finally moved back in, Hannah stood in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "It feels like home again," she whispered. I nodded, looking out at the fields bathed in golden light. "It is home," I said, "and no one will ever take it from us again." But deep down, I knew this fight had changed me. I had always believed in the law as a shield, something that protected the innocent. Now I saw it as a sword as well, one that could strike down those who abuse power. And I had wielded it with precision. For Kane, Prison would be his new neighborhood, and I doubted he would enjoy its community standards.